welcome. We're going to be talking about parenting the bright and intense and really referring a lot to this book, which is, if I can be in it with it, Gifted and Distractible. And want this to feel like a time for you to reflect a little bit about how you've gotten to this point. Um, Hopefully this will spark more conversation than just this day, and you'll take a lot out of it. I was telling the ladies before, I have a lot of notes, so I'm going to try to give you a lot of value. We'll talk about common gifted traits, intensity, and strategies for reducing the stress in your home, especially as we're getting closer to summer. And just before we launch in, I want to share with you guys my typical illustration or metaphor for giftedness is like an octopus with 8 legs instead of having, like, they have these 8 legs and they have all these tentacles on it. And a very intense kid is going to be someone who more so has 15 or 20 legs with all these tentacles on it. And it's their capacity to sense and feel and maneuver through the world in a deeper way. And it's like a double-edged sword. So we'll get into that a little bit and I'll refer back to that idea. But especially when I talk about sensitivity, that's what I mean. It's like being able to be they're very sensitive to the feelings around them or to where they are in space, to the sensory feelings like their socks. So I'll come back to the octopus, but I just wanted to share that with you to jump off. Okay, so I'm going to refer to giftedness a lot. And a lot of times the clients that I work with haven't been tested. They aren't officially gifted according to an IQ test, but I can sense that they are very intense. They have this greater capacity, maybe just for emotions, maybe for other things. And so I use the word gifted and intense kind of interchangeably, and then bring in ADHD or the distractibility that the book talks about. A lot of times, people that are very intense usually have, it's like I kind of say, God doesn't play favorites. He doesn't just give you everything like, oh, okay, you're going to be very intelligent. Everything's going to come easy for you. It's usually this high intelligence and then something else that balances that out, whether it's ADHD, OCD, anxiety, depression. So there's this balance, this twice exceptionality. And that's what the book refers to a lot. Um, and so talking about how we have kids with big thoughts, big feelings, big meltdowns, and how it's not just academic. So we get into the power struggles, the perfectionism, the summer chaos of having them home and having to manage all of that. And so hopefully we'll cover all of that here today. Okay, so I'm in the way, lean this way. All right. So, gifted kids. I tried to ease into this because obviously this is my very favorite thing, and this is what I have a ton of notes on. But here you have just kind of a checklist that covers a lot of things, and it's more than just that life comes easily for them. That's kind of the myth, is that gifted kids are just easy kids, that they do well in school and don't need much from the adults around them, and that they'll likely grow up to be successful. And so there's this political issue of, okay, we don't want to give these kids too many resources. It's kind of elitist, and we don't want to, leave kids out that aren't as intelligent. And I advocate for the flip side, that these kids have really intense needs. They are quote unquote more intelligent, but if you were to look at the learning curve of intelligence, or we don't say learning curve, the bell curve of intelligence, that the further they are in terms of being intensely intelligent, the more out of sync they feel in the world and the more support that they need to balance that out. And so they could turn out to be very successful, but there's just as many that are loners or end up in prison without the appropriate amount of support for the areas of their life that are difficult. And so I really advocate for supporting gifted kids. That's kind of my why. And so it's very difficult to parent a gifted kid, especially if their behavior doesn't match their intellectual skills. It's confusing. So the book, one of the main illustrations in the book, like of actual drawing, is of a 3-layer cake. And on the different layers, it's asynchronous development, perfectionism, and overexcitabilities. And so this asynchronous development we see in very intense kids where they sound like a philosopher. They can explain all these deep ideas and they ask really deep questions, but then they cry because their sock feels weird. And you're like, okay, that doesn't match. Like, can't you just get over it? And they cannot get over it. So on their best days, their giftedness outshines their struggles and they're able to balance like an insane amount of work and feel happy and enjoy doing it. And on their worst days, if they're sick or if there's just one thing that's kind of off, then their struggle outshines their gift and they overbook themselves or get very sick or can't even initiate the task of rescheduling. And so they look like a flake. Or they are not empathetic with other people. And so, and then they internalize that and feel like a failure. And so you have these flip side, these two sides of very intense people where they can be very successful and feel on top of the world, and then they can fail and feel like failures very deeply. So that is the term asynchronous development. And we'll come back to all of this as we go through it. Perfectionism is also has a myth of being a good thing. And it is sometimes, but other times it is crippling anxiety. And I have this core belief when working with kids that they want to please you and that if they could do better, they would. And so when we run into words like they're just lazy or they're afraid to take risks, they're unmotivated, or the failure to launch when you get into a little bit of an older teen, for me, I usually hear like, okay, they need some support in a different way. What we're doing isn't working because I don't think that they're being lazy. I think that there's some really intense anxiety happening and some fear of taking that next step and needing that support in order to get there. Often we'll see them getting hung up on grades or, I want to get it right. I want to get, have the rubric and do everything perfectly instead of actually wanting to learn and grow. And it's like, it's almost, they want to learn and grow until they get jaded and then they just want to get the grade. And so we want to catch that and really help. And I'll talk about that towards, as we get further into this of how we can help identify that and model for them and teach them about overcoming perfectionism. And then finally, the third layer in the cake is overexcitabilities. And this comes back to that octopus metaphor. So the extra octopus legs that your kid got, they might be this deeper capacity for feelings or intellectual knowledge where they just ask, and it's never enough. Movement where they love to be moving or they just know where the soccer ball is on the field at all times. They're just very aware of the world around them. Imagination, so they can hold this whole fantasy world in their head while they're in school and come home and tell you all about it. Or felt sense, so this really physical capacity. They want soft clothes and they feel that string on the inside of their sock and they don't like things too loud. So it's whether it's a sensory desire where they want more or it's a sensory avoidance where they want less. And so we'll dive into this and it kind of explore what's going on with your kids. But when you're looking at this and you don't know what you're looking at, it's very confusing and overwhelming. And you wonder to yourself, is this normal? Like, is this bad? What do I do? Did I do something wrong? If I failed them and not disciplining them enough, that's a big thing that I hear a lot of just this feeling of I'm failing them because they're not disciplined. And I would say back to that parent, you're doing an amazing job. They're not a typical kid. They need different approaches in order to be able to do what the typical child can do, but they can also do way beyond what the typical child can do if we can support them in a way that works for them. Okay. And then the bigger why too is loving these kids. I would go back to saying, I was saying, I really believe that kids want to help and they're doing what they can. And if they're not doing it, it's because they need more support. There's something there's an issue with the system. And I would say too that I really believe that their intensity is necessary for our world, that we need kids who have these extra octopus eggs. It's such a silly illustration, but and that I really would love us as a community to come alongside them and support them so that they can feel deeply, they can think deeply, they can solve the problems that we need them to solve, and that they can have a healthy mind while they're doing it. And so helping them know what they need in order to stay regulated and keep their nervous system regulated and essentially not go crazy while trying to change the world. That's my hope and dream for them. And so I just wrote down a couple other examples. It's like the kid that asks about death when they're 4, or melts down after school, even though they're perfect at school. They come home and just get into the fetal position and can't do the next thing, the next little demand that you have for them. Okay, so we're getting into, this is a little bit ahead. Let's see if I can go forward and then back. Okay, so we're getting into the double-edged sword of gifted traits. We really admire as a community intensity, passion, independence, and those are the things that our gifted kids are really known for, whether it's being bossy or um, just very intense. And then what I would like us to work on a little bit is relabeling it to kind of keep ourselves compassionate towards our child. So instead of bossy, it's like leadership capabilities, um, and things that need to be channeled instead of a a personality issue or deficit. It's like, okay, wow, we have this gift. Now let's channel it. Kids don't just have more intelligence. It's like they feel more, question more, react more, just this deep ability and need for more. And so I phrased some of these things on here. So the strength of deep empathy, the struggle might be that they're easily overwhelmed. So they get into it very deep. They want to know all their friends. They're the therapist for all their friends. But then at the end of the day, somebody needs to talk to them and they're like, I just cannot, they can't handle anymore. The strength of creativity. And then, so they're so creative, they think so out of the box, but every time you walk into their room, it is like a bomb blew up and they just cannot, you ask them to pick up things after they've created this masterpiece and they're burned out. They cannot imagine like organizing or taking that next step. The strength of the high energy. So that's like, wow, they can play soccer for hours and never get exhausted. They're just ready to go to the next thing and they always have the energy. They're always performing. But when it's time to be done and transition to something else, there's a huge meltdown because they're just going 150% all the time. It's hard to switch gears. Strong-willed, like you never have to worry that they're going to be taken advantage of or, kidnapped because they're not going to let that happen. The person will return them. And that's the struggle of being rigid or defiant. If it's not something that they understand or wasn't their idea, they really can't go with the flow. The strength of a fast learner. And again, that's that, wow, it must be so nice to not have to run these skills with your kid all the time. But the struggle of being bored or impatient to where they just lose all motivation to participate at all because it's just so boring for them to have to hang with everyone else. And so when we can reframe the trait, then we can start to see how we can support them, and how not to maybe exploit their strength because it comes with this struggle. And if we can understand that about them and help them to understand that about themselves, then eventually they can create a life for themselves where they're not burned out because they know, oh man, I get really empathetic. So I need to create some structure, some boundaries around myself so that I don't burn out and get overwhelmed. Or I can go 100% full energy, but then I get into conflict with people. And so I need to make sure I'm taking care of myself. So just all that extra care and attention so that they can live an adult life eventually that is mentally healthy. Obviously, through everything we've talked about, raising kids can be, well, intense kids can be isolating and make you question your parenting constantly. And so I would love for you to try out some of these affirmations, just saying it to yourself and noticing how you feel in your body when you think it or when you write it down. And just noticing how it helps you to reframe this difficult task that you have. And summer can feel like a break or it can feel like a battleground. And so just thinking of what little insight do you want to take with you after today. I did put I have an evening workshop at the office here for $199 for up to 2 adults. So you could bring a friend if you don't have the co-parent to come along. And we'll spend some time really developing a summer plan and getting into a little bit more of the specifics of your kid. And then, of course, you're always welcome to reach out for one-on-one coaching and strategizing together